They thought she was just another pushy customer, but in just 4 minutes, she'd remind them who really ran the place. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when Dr. Eleanor Brooks stepped into the grand marble lobby of Heritage Federal Bank, wearing a crisp navy blazer and calm determination. At 42, Eleanor had built financial empires and earned her doctorate in economics from Princeton. Yet none of that mattered to Brandon Hale, the 28-year-old branch manager barely 3 months into the job. Seeing a black woman walking in unannounced, he didn't recognize her. He only saw what he assumed she was. "Ma'am, this is a private institution," he barked. "You can't just walk in here demanding things." Customers looked up. A few raised their phones, sensing something was off. Security stepped in, and Hale's voice rose for the crowd to hear. "People like you need to understand your place." Eleanor didn't flinch. She simply placed her briefcase gently on the counter. "I'm here to conduct routine business," she said evenly. But Hale wasn't having it. Even as Officer Ramirez, the bank's long-serving guard, hesitated, sensing this situation was different. Hale pushed forward. "If you don't leave, I'll call the real police." Live streams were already rolling. Bystanders recorded confused why a calm, well-dressed woman was being treated like a threat. Eleanor remained composed, glancing at her Cartier watch. "You have 2 minutes," she said softly. No one yet realized she didn't need to raise her voice, because in exactly 2 minutes, everything would change. Eleanor Brooks stood there small in stature, but commanding the center of the room. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't made any sudden moves, and certainly hadn't caused a scene. But the tension in Heritage Federal Bank's lobby was thick enough to cut with a knife. Customers watched in stunned silence or through their phone screens, as Brandon Hale, still oblivious to who he was dealing with, puffed up his chest behind the mahogany counter. "You've got 2 minutes until what exactly?" He sneered, arms crossed, in smug defiance. "Until you call your lawyer." Eleanor's response was calm and surgical. She reached into her leather handbag and pulled out a sleek phone encased in an elegant case marked discreetly with her initials EB. She scrolled with practiced ease and selected a contact. The phone rang once. "James, it's Eleanor. Code 7, Heritage Federal. Downtown branch. Immediate response." She ended the call after just 15 seconds and placed the phone back in her bag. Brandon laughed nervously, though the sweat beginning to form on his brow betrayed his unease. "Corporate security is probably laughing at that call right now," he said, trying to keep up the performance for the watching crowd. 80 seconds, Eleanor said, barely above a whisper. She wasn't bluffing, and the shift in energy was palpable. Officer Ramirez, who had worked this bank's security detail for over 15 years, was starting to sweat himself. He hadn't seen this woman do anything wrong. No shouting, no hostility. In fact, her restraint was almost unnerving. He glanced at the assistant branch manager, Lena Tran, who had emerged moments earlier from the back office. Lena, sharp and loyal to a fault, had been promoted rapidly over the past 3 years. At first, she had backed Hale, assuming Eleanor was just another customer creating drama. But now, something about this woman's poise and the unmistakable flash of a Platinum Centurion Amex card earlier was gnawing at her gut. Trying to de-escalate, Lena stepped forward with a polite tone. "Do you have an account number, ma'am? I'd be happy to assist you." Eleanor simply smiled. "That won't be necessary." Brandon scoffed. "See, no account, no business, just another troublemaker looking for a viral moment." The word "another" hung in the air, heavy with implication. The live stream viewer count on Sarah Morales' phone had just crossed 7,000. Sarah, a well-known community advocate who'd originally walked into the bank just to deposit a check, whispered into her mic, "Y'all are watching this, right? This man is literally trying to throw out a customer for existing while black." More phones came out. Marcus Trent, a local blogger with over 40,000 followers, had started his own recording. "This," he muttered into his camera, "is gonna explode." Back inside the bank, the seconds ticked on. Lena, still unsure, accessed the internal client database on her tablet. "May I have your name, at least?" she asked carefully. "You never asked," Eleanor said smoothly, locking eyes with Brandon. "You assumed I didn't belong." That sentence measured simple true cut through the noise like a sharp blade. Several customers nodded. Brandon's confident stance faltered just slightly. At 2:59 p.m., Lena's tablet chimed. A message had popped up. "Emergency downtown branch. Do not escalate. En route. James Morgan, Regional VP." She froze. James Morgan. That meant corporate knew. That meant someone important was coming. She looked up at Eleanor with wide eyes. "Brandon," she began, "we might want to—" Her words were drowned out by the echo of fast-approaching footsteps. Through the tall glass doors, James Morgan burst into the lobby. His suit rumpled his face, pale and panicked. He scanned the crowd, then saw her. "Dr. Brooks!" He gasped. "I am so incredibly sorry." The name landed like a thunderclap. Brandon Hale blinked in confusion. "Wait, Dr. Brooks?" "Yes?" Eleanor replied gently. "You didn't ask for identification, remember?" Lena fumbled with her tablet, frantically searching the corporate directory. When she found the entry, her face turned ashen. Dr. Eleanor Brooks, founder, CEO, and majority shareholder, Heritage Federal Bank. James turned toward Brandon with fire in his eyes. "Dr. Brooks owns 67% of this bank. She created it. You just tried to throw the founder out of her own building." Brandon's knees nearly buckled. Officer Ramirez instinctively stepped back, distancing himself from the fallout. The crowd was dead silent. Sarah's stream viewer count hit 15,000. Eleanor remained perfectly composed. "There's a board meeting in 2 minutes," she said, checking her watch once more. "I suggest you attend." Without another word, she walked to the elevators. "Should I come upstairs?" Lena asked, her voice trembling. Eleanor nodded once, then added without looking back, "Bring Mr. Hale." And so the elevator doors opened, swallowing the three of them. The founder, the executive, and the now dismantled man who had almost cost the institution everything. The entire room watched as they disappeared upward, knowing full well they had just witnessed the beginning of something much, much bigger. The elevator glided silently up the building, carrying Dr. Eleanor Brooks, James Morgan, Brandon Hale, and Lena Tran, directly to the 47th floor, the executive level of Heritage Federal Bank. No one spoke a word. James stood quietly like a nervous bodyguard. Lena clutched her tablet as if it were the last shield between her and the consequences. And Brandon, once arrogant and full of confidence, now looked like a man about to face a professional verdict. Eleanor was a stark contrast. Her hands were calmly clasped in front of her eyes, steady, as she watched the floor numbers tick upward toward their final destination. Each floor felt like another step, bringing Brandon closer to the edge of the cliff he had built himself. "Dr. Brooks," Brandon stammered. "I didn't know who you were. If you had just said something from the start, then." Eleanor turned her head gaze calm but sharp as a blade. "And if I weren't the CEO, if I were just a regular customer, would you have still treated me the same?" The question didn't need an answer. In the silence of the elevator, everyone knew the truth to Brandon. Not everyone was worthy of respect, only those he deemed deserving. The 47th floor. The doors opened to a luxurious space with high ceilings, crystal-clear glass overlooking the city, and a long, polished walnut conference table. The board meeting had started minutes earlier. Attendees were reviewing financial reports when they were abruptly interrupted by James and the group following behind him. Robert Sterling, the 71-year-old board chairman who had mentored Eleanor from the early days, immediately recognized her. "Eleanor, what's going on?" James stepped forward, his voice tense. "We have a Code 7 situation at the downtown branch. I recommend we pause the meeting." The room fell utterly silent. Eleanor walked to the head of the table, not yet taking a seat. "I apologize for the interruption, but a serious incident just occurred on the ground floor, and it must be addressed immediately, publicly, and transparently." She opened her briefcase, pulled out a tablet, and connected it to the large screen at the front of the room. Within seconds, a live stream from Sarah Morales appeared, showing Brandon berating a customer, ordering her to leave the bank. His voice rang out clearly. "People like you need to understand your place." The board was stunned. Several members covered their mouths. Dr. Patricia Allen, the only other black member besides Eleanor, clenched her jaw. "Oh my God!" The video continued, Brandon's voice growing louder as he insisted Eleanor didn't have an account, called for security, and even threatened to call the police. Finally, James' voice was heard, Dr. Brooks. "I'm so incredibly sorry." Sterling placed his hand on the table, voice heavy. This actually happened today," Eleanor nodded. "And as of this moment, the video has over 50,000 views. The bank's name is trending across all major social platforms under the hashtag #HadBankingWhileBlack. A series of graphs and data followed on-screen share counts, negative reactions, projected customer loss, and potential legal implications. Eleanor didn't raise her voice. She didn't assign blame. Instead, she laid it out clearly. "I'm not here to destroy anyone's career, but I won't allow this to continue. I'm proposing a comprehensive reform plan starting with unconscious bias, training a customer interaction monitoring system, and regular audits at every branch." David Kim, the board's communications expert, looked as if he might faint. "Crisis PR will be nearly impossible if we don't act decisively." Eleanor turned to Brandon. "Do you have anything you'd like to say?" Brandon trembled, his lips barely moving. I made a mistake." "Be specific." "I didn't recognize you." "What else?" He lowered his head. "I judged you based on your appearance. I assumed you didn't belong here." That sentence landed like a gavel. Dr. Allen looked up, voice firm. "So what you're saying is because she's black, you assumed she couldn't be a legitimate customer?" Brandon said nothing. The silence said everything. Eleanor turned to this board. "I'm not seeking compensation. I'm seeking real change, and it starts with the decision this board makes today." Sterling gave a slow, solemn nod. "We'll take a vote now." 1 minute later, Eleanor's entire plan was unanimously approved. Every member agreed to implement the reforms within 30 days. As the meeting adjourned, Sterling walked over to Eleanor and said, "You didn't just save this bank, you just changed the industry." Eleanor gave a quiet smile. "I just want to make sure that the next time a black woman walks into a bank, she's welcomed, not threatened." And with that, the historic transformation of Heritage Federal Bank officially began. As the board meeting adjourned, the atmosphere in the room was still heavy with disbelief. Heritage Federal Bank had just experienced a seismic shift, and everyone knew it. But for Dr. Eleanor Brooks, the real work was only beginning. She remained at the front of the room, her posture straight, her expression composed. "Before anyone leaves," she said, "I want to present the next steps in our reform plan. This is not just about this incident. This is about the culture that allowed it to happen in the first place." She tapped her tablet, and a new presentation filled the screen. Across bold letters read, "The Brooks Protocol. A systemic framework to eliminate bias in banking." Several board members shifted in their seats. What they expected was a press release and maybe some public apology. What they got instead was a blueprint for an entirely new way of operating. The Brooks Protocol, Eleanor explained, will implement immediate measures across all customer-facing departments. These include monthly anti-bias training, real-time interaction monitoring, anonymous reporting tools for employees, and quarterly audits conducted by third-party specialists. She let the words sink in before continuing. "I estimate the cost of implementation will be approximately $4.7 million, with an annual maintenance of $2.1 million. But when compared to the potential cost of lawsuits, regulatory penalties, and customer loss, this is a small investment." James Morgan, standing near the boardroom doors, was furiously taking notes on his tablet. "What's your proposed timeline, Dr. Brooks?" 30 days for policy rollout, 60 days for tech deployment, 90 days for full staff training and integration. She looked around the room. "We don't have the luxury of time. Public attention is growing, and so is our risk." Sterling, seated now, and sipping slowly from a small porcelain coffee cup, looked at her with equal parts respect and awe. "This could make us the gold standard for the entire financial sector." Eleanor nodded. "That's the goal. And not just for image, for impact." Then came the uncomfortable question from David Kim, the board's communications strategist. "And Mr. Hale," Eleanor looked to Brandon, still seated at the edge of the room, face pale and posture collapsed. "Mr. Hale has two options: immediate resignation with severance or termination for cause with no benefits. The choice is his." Brandon didn't argue. His voice, quiet and almost cracked, simply said, "I'll resign." Turning her attention to Lena Tran, Eleanor's tone softened. "Your willingness to reassess the situation and your eventual intervention matters. You'll undergo intensive bias training and begin a 6-month probationary period. Your growth can be part of this transformation." Lena's face flushed with relief. "Thank you, Dr. Brooks. I won't take that lightly." Sterling folded his hands. "What do you need from this board?" "Unanimous approval of these protocols within 30 days and public reaffirmation of our commitment to equity for all customers, regardless of appearance, income, or background." The board voted unanimously. As the room began to clear, Eleanor remained behind with Sterling and James. The older man gave her a faint smile. "You know, Eleanor, this could have been a complete disaster." She returned the smile. "It still might be if we don't act fast, but we have a chance to lead, not just react." James, scrolling through his tablet again, looked up. "Dr. Brooks' social media views just passed 120,000. CNN Business has already contacted our PR department." "Expected," she replied. "We'll need a public announcement," Sterling added. "He'll hold a press conference at 9 a.m. tomorrow presenting the Brooks Protocol. We go on record with full transparency, no defensiveness, no excuses." Sterling gave a slow nod. "That's the kind of leadership this industry hasn't seen in a long time." As Eleanor packed her tablet, James looked at her curiously. "What made you so calm throughout that entire ordeal? Most CEOs would have sued the bank they built." Eleanor paused. "Because this wasn't about me. It was about every customer who walks in and is judged before they're helped. My power isn't in suing people, it's in changing systems." As they exited the boardroom, the evening sun streamed in through the tall windows. The city below looked peaceful, almost unaware that the entire culture of a major financial institution had just been rewritten. And just one floor below, Brandon Hale sat alone in a quiet conference room, staring at the resignation form on the table. His fall from grace had been swift, public, and unforgettable. But perhaps the most crushing part of all was knowing that he hadn't just underestimated a woman, he'd underestimated a revolution. Tomorrow, the world would know exactly what Heritage Federal Bank was becoming, and Eleanor Brooks would lead them there. By the time the sun rose over the city the next morning, the name Dr. Eleanor Brooks was no longer just trending, it was dominating every major news outlet, social media platform, and business forum. At precisely 9:00 a.m., as promised, Eleanor stepped up to the podium at Heritage Federal Bank's headquarters to unveil the Brooks Protocol to the world. Dressed in the same navy blazer that had sparked assumptions just a day before, she addressed a packed press room with quiet poise. The live stream was being broadcast to tens of thousands, with corporate clients, banking competitors, advocacy groups, and federal regulators all watching closely. She didn't deliver outrage. She delivered facts. With clear charts, case studies, and projected outcomes, Eleanor laid out how unconscious bias could be systematically identified, prevented, and corrected. She didn't just talk about reform, she presented it as an opportunity, a competitive advantage, and above all, a moral imperative. The response was swift and profound. Media outlets hailed her as the future of ethical finance. The American Banking Association requested the full framework for internal review. Federal regulators praised the transparency and initiative. Within 48 hours, 3 competing banks announced their own rushed internal reviews, clearly caught off guard by the public's overwhelming support of Heritage's proactive stance. The viral video that began it all surpassed 2 million views, and new hashtags sprang up overnight. Bias-free, banking had Brooks Protocol, and had lead with respect. But for Eleanor, the attention wasn't the goal. The results were. Internally, implementation began immediately. Each branch received detailed guidance on the new protocols. Real-time bias detection software was installed on customer service terminals, designed to flag interactions that included repeated interruptions, assumptions about account type based on appearance, or dismissive tones toward accented speech. Weekly data would be reviewed by compliance officers to identify red flags and coach staff accordingly. Training modules rolled out across 47 locations, including bias simulation exercises and customer perspective immersion. Staff underwent live workshops, not just to memorize scripts, but to explore their own assumptions and habits. Participation wasn't optional, it was now a core competency, and the numbers responded just as Eleanor had projected. Within 3 weeks of the rollout, customer satisfaction increased by 18%, while formal complaint filings dropped by 63%. Employee morale improved too, particularly among minority staff, who reported feeling seen, heard, and finally supported. One senior teller at the Riverside branch remarked in a company-wide forum, "For the first time in my 20 years here, I feel like I don't have to code switch or explain my existence. I can just focus on doing my job well." Lena Tran, now under a 6-month probation, embraced the process more fully than anyone had anticipated. She studied training materials in the evenings, scheduled one-on-one coaching sessions with her staff, and voluntarily requested feedback from diverse customers. Her transformation was so genuine that by the end of the first month, regional leadership extended her probationary period by only 3 months instead of 6, citing her exceptional effort and professional humility. Lena, who had once frozen under pressure, now mentored other mid-level managers on how to spot and stop bias in its earliest forms. She didn't try to erase her past mistake, he used it to push others toward better standards. Meanwhile, James Morgan proved himself as the right partner for Eleanor's vision. Though his initial panic was genuine, he threw himself into the reform efforts with purpose. He personally visited each regional branch within the first 60 days of the protocol rollout. At staff meetings, he didn't sugarcoat what had happened. "We failed," he said bluntly. "But now we're leading. And that's something to be proud of." Eleanor respected his openness. She knew true cultural change wasn't about perfect leaders, it was about consistent accountability. The story continued to build momentum far beyond the bank's walls. Eleanor's interview on 60 Minutes aired to over 10 million viewers. She wasn't presented as a victim, but as an architect of change. News anchors spoke less about Brandon Hale's failure and more about Eleanor's vision. University business programs added the Brooks Protocol to their ethics curriculum. A feature in Harvard Business Review called it the most scalable anti-bias framework in modern corporate America. Even corporate giants outside of finance like retail chains, airline companies, and insurance firms began inquiring about how they could adapt the model to their own operations. But the most meaningful endorsement came from the people. Grassroots organizations that had fought for decades against banking discrimination sent letters of support and requested partnerships. The NAACP and the National Urban League offered to co-host educational forums for both consumers and bankers alike. The Hispanic Chamber of Commerce publicly moved their accounts to Heritage Federal, citing its leadership on inclusion. Community trust, something no dollar could buy, was being rebuilt from the ground up. And through it all, Eleanor stayed focused. She didn't take interviews to gloat or capitalize on attention. When asked why she hadn't sued the bank for millions, She answered simply, "That would fix my moment." I wanted to fix the institution. For her, this wasn't about personal vindication. It was about making sure that the next Eleanor who walked into any bank in America wouldn't be mistaken for someone who didn't belong. Her office, once a quiet suite on the executive floor, had become a command center for change. Every morning, she reviewed implementation metrics before coffee. Every evening, she wrote follow-ups to teams who showed improvement. And every week, she personally answered at least a dozen handwritten letters from young women, many of them Black, Asian, Latin, who said she'd inspired them to dream bigger and demand better. The quiet storm Eleanor Brooks unleashed hadn't just changed one bank. It had awakened a movement that was no longer asking for a seat at the table. They were building a new table altogether. 6 weeks after that unforgettable day in the marble lobby, Heritage Federal Bank's downtown branch didn't just look different, it felt different. The elegant chandelier still hung above the polished floor, and the same columns framed the grand entrance, but the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The bank had transformed from a place of tension and quiet prejudice into a symbol of progress and accountability. Behind what was once Brandon Hale's desk, now sat Maria Gonzalez, a 15-year banking veteran newly promoted from a suburban branch. Her appointment sent a strong message: experience, integrity, and inclusive leadership would now define Heritage's culture, not pedigree, not assumptions, and certainly not bias. Maria moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew both the job and the communities it served. She didn't waste time on grand gestures. Instead, she focused on results. Her desk was no longer a gate, it was an open station. Customers noticed immediately. Wall posters displaying the bank's new anti-discrimination policies now lined the entryway, printed in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. Customer service reps wore small pins that read, "Respect for all." Digital screens played short videos about the Brooks Protocol, highlighting its mission and values. The culture wasn't performative, it was present. One of the most powerful changes came from within the team. Lena Tran, once frozen by indecision during Dr. Brooks' mistreatment, now submitted detailed monthly diversity reports and had become a quiet force of change in the organization. Her reports showed an 18% increase in customer satisfaction, a 63% drop in complaint reports, and a 41% increase in employee confidence when handling bias-related incidents. The numbers weren't just promising, they were transformative. They told a story of real, measurable progress. Even Officer Ramirez, the longtime security guard who had hesitated during the initial incident, had found a renewed sense of purpose. Drawing from his 15 years of experience, he now led bias prevention training for incoming guards across the district. "I've seen discrimination play out more times than I can count," he told new hires during orientation. "But the Brooks Protocol gives us tools to stop it before the damage is done." Technological implementation had also elevated the transformation. Heritage now used a real-time bias detection algorithm to monitor customer interactions. Whenever a teller displayed signs of unconscious bias, such as repeatedly asking a customer to repeat themselves despite clear communication, and alert would ping the assistant manager's tablet for review. Just that week, Lena received a subtle alert during a teller's conversation with an elderly Vietnamese customer. Though the language was English, the teller's tone and insistence for clarification were flagged. Lena quickly reviewed the transcript, coached the teller, and made sure the customer left with the respectful service they deserved. What might have once gone unnoticed or even unchallenged was now an opportunity for growth, not litigation. Outside the bank, the changes rippled through the business community. Local entrepreneurs, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds, were opening accounts at record rates. the branch saw a 31% increase in new account openings, particularly among minority-owned businesses. Community leaders took note. Marcus Trent, the local blogger whose footage helped the story go viral, published a follow-up editorial in Forbes titled "From Viral Shame to National Model: The Brooks Protocol in Action." The story of a bank, once on the brink of public disgrace, had become a national case study in how meaningful reform by ethical leadership could rebuild trust. And at the heart of it all stood Dr. Eleanor Brooks. She didn't seek the spotlight, but it found her anyway. What had started as a moment of personal humiliation had now evolved into a full-blown movement. Across branches in employee meetings and through anonymous staff feedback, one phrase kept resurfacing. "This place finally feels like it belongs to everyone." That more than any quarterly report or media headline was the real proof that change wasn't just happening, it was here to stay. By the 3-month mark, the Brooks Protocol had grown far beyond the confines of Heritage Federal. Bankit was now influencing institutions across the entire financial sector. The viral video that captured the initial confrontation had surpassed 2 million views. But its greatest impact wasn't just in numbers, it was in culture. Internally, the bank had undergone a full transformation. But now that transformation was setting new benchmarks for an industry that had long resisted confronting its own biases. Major financial firms began reaching out to Dr. Eleanor Brooks, not with platitudes, but with genuine requests for consultation. 3 national banks publicly adopted modified versions of her protocol, and several more requested pilot access to Heritage's training modules. The American Banking Association officially recognized Heritage as a model for proactive bias prevention, while federal regulators, impressed by the thoroughness of the program, decided not only to hold off on penalties, but to invite Eleanor to contribute to upcoming national guidelines on fair banking practices. Meanwhile, public trust in Heritage soared. Customers from all walks of life, many of whom had once felt invisible, began opening accounts in droves. One Black entrepreneur who opened a business account at the downtown branch told local news, "I didn't just choose Heritage because they got called out. Chose them because they responded with change." That means something. The downtown branch, now under Maria Gonzalez's leadership, reported the highest customer retention rates in the bank's history and led the region in minority business account growth. Monthly customer surveys showed a dramatic improvement in perceived fairness, respect, and transparency. Employees, too, felt the difference. For the first time, junior staff were actively participating in shaping training materials, sharing lived experiences to improve empathy-based learning. Internally, Eleanor kept a disciplined focus. She formed a permanent Diversity and Ethics Oversight Council composed of employees from every level: tellers, security guards, loan officers, IT staff, to ensure that leadership decisions reflected the voices on the ground. One of the most innovative developments was the bias detection feedback loop built into employee evaluations. Staff were no longer judged solely by their sales or efficiency metrics. They were also measured by customer experience data and peer-reviewed bias alerts. The new evaluation model rewarded not just productivity, but integrity. Even the bank's digital platforms were upgraded. The customer service chatbot now included built-in prompts for inclusive language and cultural sensitivity. Training for remote agents mirrored the same expectations placed on in-person staff. In staff meetings, Eleanor often reminded her team, if it's not consistent across every channel, it's not reform. It's just good PR, and that's not what we're here for. The external impact was equally extraordinary. Universities added the Brooks Protocol to their business ethics curriculums. a documentary team began filming a special on Heritage's transformation for PBS. Most significantly, Heritage's Minority Small Business Loan Fund, launched shortly after the incident, had already approved financing for over a dozen startups. Dr. Brooks personally met with many of the recipients, offering mentorship and long-term partnership. "It's not enough to open the door," she often said. "We have to make sure people can walk through it and thrive." But perhaps the most powerful indicator of true change came not from executives or headlines, but from the quiet, everyday exchanges inside Heritage's branches. One day, a young black woman stepped into the same downtown lobby where Eleanor had once been humiliated. She was greeted warmly, offered assistance before asking, and treated like the valued customer she was. She later wrote in a comment on the bank's social media page, "I didn't know the history of this place until I looked it up after my visit. But now I do. And I'll be bringing my entire family here." That was the legacy Eleanor Brooks had built, not in one dramatic boardroom presentation, not in viral fame, but in thousands of unseen moments quietly reshaping an entire industry's definition of respect. And she was just getting started. Exactly 1 year after that pivotal afternoon, Dr. Eleanor Brooks stood once more in the marble lobby, where her silent grace had sparked a national reckoning. But this time, it wasn't silence that filled the space, it was celebration. The annual Diversity and Inclusion Summit, hosted by Heritage Federal Bank, drew community leaders, customers, employees, and media alike. There were banners commemorating the success of the Brooks Protocol, and digital monitors displayed live data showing a 34% increase in minority business accounts, zero bias-related complaints in 6 months, and customer satisfaction ratings at all-time highs. Maria Gonzalez, now a respected figure across the organization, took the stage to present the downtown branch's performance. "We didn't just correct a mistake," she said. "We turned it into a blueprint for equity." The crowd erupted in applause. Lena Tran, once haunted by her hesitation, now stood proudly as Regional Diversity Officer, managing training and compliance across 47 branches. Even Officer Ramirez, now leading security training bank-wide, spoke passionately about how intervention could prevent injustice. "Silence enables discrimination," he told the crowd. "Speaking up prevents it." Perhaps most remarkable was the presence of Sarah Morales, the young woman whose live stream had changed the course of a corporation. She now worked as Heritage's community outreach consultant, helping educate customers and communities across the country about inclusive finance. Her once impromptu video had become part of national training modules, university case studies, and even a featured segment on PBS. As she panned her camera across the crowd that day, she told her followers, "A year ago, this lobby was a battleground. Today, it's proof that change can happen." The once isolated incident had sparked a nationwide shift. 17 banks had since adopted their own versions of the Brooks Protocol. Federal regulators were working to establish similar anti-bias requirements for all financial institutions. And most importantly, Heritage's mission had never been clearer. Every person, every customer, every employee deserves dignity not as a favor but as a right, In a world that often rewards loudness and aggression, never underestimate the quiet strength of dignity, clarity, and principle. True power doesn't always come from shouting the loudest, it comes from standing firm in your values, especially when the world underestimates you. If Dr. Eleanor Brooks's story inspired you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced bias and turned it into change? We'd love to hear your story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more real-life stories of justice transformation and leadership that change the game. Let's keep building a world that respects everyone, starting with you.